Oh, online, and then we'll look at the online tools. I guess I have to be patient with it. Okay, principles of management. Anytime you manage anything, doesn't matter what it is, if you got any kind of a business, you need to know what you've got, what it is that you want, then how are you going to get what you want, and then lastly is, are you getting what you want? And we use those same principles when we talk about managing the urban forest. So simply, let's break it down and say, okay, so let's say we have a tree. That's what we that's what we have. What we want is we want 10 trees. So how do we get 10 trees? Well, we're going to plant 9 more. And after we plant the 9 more, we say, well, are we getting what you want? And we look at the picture and go, no, we got far too many trees. But in essence, that's simplifying, kind of saying what management is all about. So we took those four components, what do you have, what do you want, how you're going to get there, and are you getting there? We divided it into 9 steps of success, and the 9 steps I'm going to go through, and that's what the toolkit is based on. So step 1 is, why is it that you need a plan? And then step 2, of course, we look at what is it that you have. Step 3, we're saying, what are your needs? What are the needs of the community? Step 4 is then developing an action plan. Step 5 is the implementation. Who's going to do what? And 6 then is budget and funding. 7 is putting together all the documents. 8 is adopting them by formally adopting it, let's say by city council. And then step 9 is that monitoring, are you getting what you want? So we're going to go more into detail on that. But to begin with, and those of you that are going to be working with municipalities, it's really important for them to, I guess you'd say, understand or realize why a management plan is important. Of course, we say it's important because it has something to do with quality of life. But some of the other important reasons would be community education. If you put together a plan, then it helps the public, the community, understand the benefits of trees, the value of trees, and if they understand the benefits and value of trees, then they understand the need to manage the urban forest, which then helps give the political clout to ensure that you've got adequate funding to manage it. And then lastly, the plan really helps develop or helps demonstrate that effective use of the monies that you've been budgeted. Plan also helps you stay focused on what your vision and mission happens to be for the urban forest. It helps you focus on your goals and objectives so you don't get lost in your day-to-day operations, and you're less likely to waste resources. So when you're talking out there with whoever it is that's managing the urban forest in those communities that you're going to be working with, you're trying to go through these and sort of stimulate their thinking and realizing that that the plan is important and why the community needs it. And this part here, when I say why is the plan is important, because that's one of the first things that goes into writing this management plan. It's a very critical question that needs to be answered, and it goes into that introductory statement. It's the beginning of the plan. It's got to be convincing because the public, let's say the residents, those people that are in the community, when they start looking at the plan and you want them to buy in and support and accept the plan, you want this argument in the beginning to win them over to, the fact that trees are important, the benefits of them, and that this plan is needed in order to support that. Okay, so besides this introduction on why you need a plan, step 1 looks at the who, what, where, when, and how. These questions need to be answered. So looking at who really has to do with the people or the groups of people that need to be on board, that you need to get buy-in from. So it's the community, it's stakeholders in the community, it's elected officials, it's staff, it's the workers in the field, You identify all of these stakeholders because that's the who. Those are the people that need to buy into the value and support the plan. The what is looking at, what's the overall scope of the plan and can it be justified and eventually approved? What can I say about this? Well, let's say right now we're working with the city of San Diego and we're working on a management plan for them. And we've got a lot of community involvement, but some of the things that the individuals from the community that are trying to bring into the plan are, I guess, what am I trying to say? They're trying to throw the kitchen sink into this plan. And what I keep saying is if you put too much in there, you're not going to get buy-in and you're not going to get support from the elected officials. So when you look at that scope of the plan and how much are you actually going to look at, that's where it's saying here, make sure that you can get a sense that you can justify these components in the plan and that they will get approved. The what and where really has to do with what and where are the areas that you want to cover in the plan. The when has to do with the timeline. We generally say that to develop a good plan can take anywhere from 24 to 36 months. So that's developing a timeline that you're going to be able to stick to in order to complete the plan within that targeted time frame. And then the how, the last question is, who's going to do the work? How is it going to get done? Who's going to be the lead person? Is there funding for the plan? Are there other resources? That's the how part of it. All right, so we've covered step 1. Now we're into step 2, and that's that again, what you need to know to manage anything. What is it that you have? So obviously the first component is a tree inventory. You need to know what kind of trees you have out there and what condition they're in. But we also need to look at what the community may have in terms of existing ordinances or policies, their existing way of managing things right now, how they're doing things, who does what. Is the engineering department, what do they do? What planning department? What do parks do, what do streets do, because all of these different departments have some impact on the urban forest. So you kind of want to, people that are writing the plan need to identify all of those different departments and what they're doing to impact the urban forest. Also look at existing procedures. Is the community following best management practices, for example? And then we look at the history of trees in that community and we look at the environment. When we talk about climate action plans, this environmental component is very important. All right, so inventory. Again, when we talked about that scope, does the community want to do a management plan for just street trees, or do they want to include park trees, or do they want to include open space trees, or trees around public facilities, et cetera, et cetera? And then the question is, have all of those trees been inventoried? Is it a complete inventory? Is there adequate detail? And what are the strengths and weaknesses of that inventory? So these are questions that those of you that are going to be working with communities need to be asking. And then we look at historical significance. Are there trees that have historical significance? There's a lot of communities where trees actually are some of the earlier, I don't want to say founders, but earlier happenings within communities, and that historical significance can actually help support what you're trying to do. We also want to find out what are the public attitudes towards trees. Do they value trees? Is it a community value? What are the organization's values? What's their feelings about trees? And this is important because if the community, for example, doesn't really value trees, then that tells you that you need an educational component in this plan that's going to help convince or sell the community on, again, those benefits that we talked about for trees and why they're important to communities. When you look at the organization's value about trees. There's a lot of organizations, for example, that look at trees as being a liability, as being a cost to maintain. They cause problems with hardscape. You know, there's a lot of negativisms that some organizations have around trees. And that also then tells you that there's an education that needs to go along with the organization, with those people in that organization, to get them to, again, buy into the value and the importance of trees to the community and start making it a value, not only to the community, but a value to the organization, the management team within the city. All right, so what is the community's vision? How do they see trees? This goes into the plan, and it goes into that beginning of step 3. What is it that you want? Identifying, you know, what is the vision that the community has. And once that the vision has been defined, then you start looking at identifying the needs. So the community may need, for example, we focus on climate change, so we say that we need to have significantly more trees to help mitigate climate change. So if there aren't a lot of trees in a community, then maybe that's one of the needs, that you need to be planting more trees. And from that, then you would establish, for example, goals that have to do with planting trees, and then you develop strategies as to how those trees would get into the ground. So continuing with what it is that you want, we kind of look at 3 main areas in terms of needs. One is the community needs. The second is urban forest resource needs, which are the trees themselves. And the third has to do with the urban forest program needs, or what the management needs happen to be. So how do you get this information? A lot of it comes from those stakeholders that we identified earlier on in step 1. Okay, continuing with what it is that you want. So you also want the communities to be identifying problems that will need to be corrected or avoided in the future. Now, one of the problems that we see a lot in communities is what we say the wrong tree planted in the wrong space. So, for example, you would have a large canopy tree that was planted under power lines, and so the power company has to go in there and butcher the heck out of the trees in order to keep them out of the power lines. So this is a problem that you identify, and you say, okay, we want a program to remove those trees and replace them and plant them with a smaller statue tree that's not going to get into the lines. Another example that I go, where'd my little arrow go? Come back. Okay, it didn't do that.
Hover over it.
I'm hovering.
Scroll down.
I don't know, and I'm going the other way. Come up here. Sorry, guys, I lost my little arrow that's supposed to guide me. There it is. All right, thank you. Let's go back. Would you like to go back? No, you want to disappear on me. Come on. There we go. Okay, now I got it. Don't go away on me. There we are. Okay, so another thing that communities need to plan for are those increased maintenance costs as trees age. So if one of the goals is to be planting trees because more trees need to be, because the community needs more trees, you've got to also plan for those increased maintenance costs. And then we start prioritizing those goals. So I talked a bit about canopy cover. You know, canopy cover is kind of the area that the shade of trees covers, that land mass that they cover. And when we talk about climate change and sustainability, we look at trying to plant more trees so that we have more shade over our streets and over our communities. And I talked about the fact that can you vet these, meaning will your community support these values? So if you say, for example, right now 10% of the community is covered with trees or has a canopy cover of trees, i.e. trees shading 10% of the community, and you say, gee, we want it to be 25%, will the community support that? So all of these, the forest health, the management needs, community needs, as you're developing the goals and objectives, you want to make sure that the community is going to support those. So tree resource again, for example, on the left, you've got a picture of a tree that's been hat-racked. That's a problem. We don't do that, so they need to be removed and replaced with a better tree. On the right, you can see if you were ever in Sacramento and saw when they had trees painted blue, it's kind of trying to bring an awareness to the community of trees and the importance of them. And then, of course, your management needs, we talked about that. Are you following best management practices? Do you have adequate funding? Are the trees being pruned, for example, on a reasonable cycle? Those are management type things. And then community needs, you know, what are the values and what does the community want to see? No trees on the right or lollipop trees on the left? And we always laugh about the lollipop trees. Okay, continuing with what you want. So we've identified issues, we're identifying trends in the community. Couple of other things, as has there been a hazardous tree assessment been completed? So if you've got a lot of older trees, you need to evaluate them, or the community does, to decide whether they are safe or not. Another component of urban forestry is what we call species diversity. We want to have a whole large variety of trees in any one community, because if any particular insect or disease comes in, they can wipe out a large percentage of the trees. We, of course, don't want that. It's the same with age diversity. We don't want the trees to be all the same age, because then they're all going to start dying about the same time. So these are the components of that management plan of what it is that we want. I think I covered that one. I thought I deleted that. But anyway, so, you know, I mentioned hardscape. These are issues that may be in a city. And how are you going to deal with hardscape conflicts? That would become part of the plan, removing the tree and probably replacing it with one that can survive in that smaller of an area. Okay, so once the needs are identified, we start establishing goals, objectives, strategies, and actions. And I want to go over and talk a little bit about them. So goals are short and long-term aims that you want to accomplish. So again, if you had a goal of wanting 25% canopy cover, that's kind of a long-term game that you would, a long-term goal that you would have. A short-term goal might be something like, we want to plant 200 trees this next year. Objectives are concrete attainments that can be achieved by following a certain number of steps. And let's look at it a little more. So objectives provide more specificity by breaking goals into components that make up each goal. So like goals, objectives are desired outcomes, but they're more specific and they're more limited in scope. So you're kind of getting down into the nitty-gritty. So we've kind of gone through steps 1, 2, and 3. Identifying the who, what, when, where, and how. Assessing what it is that you have, and identifying needs and trends, and setting those goals, objectives, and strategies. And then we always say, are you on schedule? If you remember earlier on, I said, set up a timeline. How long is it going to take to finish this process of developing a plan? And you keep asking yourself, are you on schedule? All right, developing action plans. That is the next step. So once you've outlined those goals and objectives, then you start saying, you know, what are the tasks and the strategies for completing the particular objectives? So you may want to you will want to complete that pruning component in the plan. You'll want a planting component. Boy, I have a sip of tea here. Okay. The removal and replacement component is sort of what I said. When you identify issues like the wrong tree planted under power lines, that may fall into this removal and replacement program. Are there adequate community ordinances that support the urban forest and the trees? Does the community have a tree advisory board or a commission? Do you want a public education component? And then any other components that you would want to have in it. So how do we get what we want? Well, we want to select action and tools to achieve these goals and objectives. So an action is something that you do to achieve an outcome. And so, for example, you're planting trees, you're conducting educational workshops, or you're enforcing regulations. Tools, on the other hand, are the things that you use to help you take an action. So, for example, a tree inventory is, if that's one of your actions that you need to do, if one of your actions is to evaluate the urban forest to see what the needs are, a tool to help you do that would be to complete a tree inventory. And that then, of course, helps scheduling the maintenance and the management, identifying hazardous trees and places where you could plant trees. So the appropriate tools and actions are going to vary with the overall target. Again, are we talking tree resources? Are we talking management needs, or are we talking community needs? And then there's the question about, is the management direct or is the management indirect? So the question would be, does the community maintain its trees in-house with its own employees, or does it use contract services? And you would have the different actions and tools based on that. Some communities use both. So an example of actions and tools. So, okay, we have a goal that we want to follow good cultural practices. Our objective is to use best management practices. They're going to give us those guidelines for the good cultural practices. And the action is going to be to write policies that will support best management practices. We want to get the policies approved by the elected officials, and then we want to train staff and contractors in those best management practice policies. And the tools to do that would be to use the International Society of Arboriculture's best management practices guidelines, and to use the American National Standards Institute standards for managing trees. All right, before I go into step 5, are there any questions so that I can take a little break here?
Right now, it doesn't look like we do have any questions listed, but we definitely can just give a few seconds and see if anyone has anything that they would like to type in to be answered at this point of time.
Okay. Let me know when to start again.
Okay, I have to log in here. I can't see this thing, right?
I don't think so. No.
Okay, good.
This one.
Okay, it looks like, Andrew, you might have a question, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. And Andrew, you should now be able to ask any question that you do have.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, thanks for putting on this webinar. I have a quick question about just in general, what are some examples of good tree management plans that you suggest we should look over if we just want a good example of a city that's done it really well?
Especially a small city.
Particularly a small city.
I was just about to say San Francisco. Well, you could look at Santa Monica, but that's a little more sophisticated. Where you guys are at, what do you think, Nancy? Dixon?
Well, yeah, Dixon is good. If you go to our regional council's website, which is inlandurbanforestcouncil.org, and then there's a tab for Urban Forest Management Toolkit, UFMP Toolkit. There's a list. I think we probably have published there from somewhere between 15 and 20 that you could look at.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but I think Dixon is good for near Sacramento. What was that coastal city that was small?
Morro Bay.
Morro Bay had a good one as well for a small city. Okay?
Well, we are in the Central Valley. Is there more of, so Dixon, that's more inland versus Morro Bay?
Yeah, that's more inland.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Sure.
Should we mute now?
Okay, so Andrew, I've muted you. Central Valley Team, you're muted. And it looks like that was the only question at this point of time. So David and Nancy, please feel free to move forward. And if any other questions do pop up, you know, we can take them as they come.
Okay, great. So going on then to step 5, implementation. Who does what? Assigning responsible parties for the various strategies and tasks to be completed. So who does what? Budget and funding sources, prioritization, and the time schedule all fit into this. So we always feel that if you develop a management plan, it's less likely to sit on a shelf if in that plan you actually identify who is going to do what. So for example, well, what can I think of? If you're going to run a public educational program, and if the community or the city that you're working with has a public information officer, then you might want to assign that public information officer to be the lead on the educational program, and they would get together with the urban forester or arborist or tree managers or whoever happens to be actually managing the trees so that you can put together an educational program. And so let's say, for example, if one of the components of that educational program is to have an Arbor Day event that's not only planting trees but has some education along with it, and generally we do Arbor Day in the spring, like March 7th is Arbor Day in California, or people sometimes you go with along with Earth Day. So you know who is responsible, and then you've got a date as to when it's going to be completed. So then within that time frame, is that my next one I got over here? Yeah. So for example, here is kind of a little time frame that we developed for an Arbor Day type program, where we're talking about, if you can see it at the top, needing to go to City Council and get them to do a proclamation for Arbor Day, and we go into coming up with a planting plan. We talk about, you know, do we need a permit to close lanes in order to do it, deadlines for planting the tree, securing the various things, coordinating tools. So as you go down this thing, you kind of see the different steps that need to take place and the deadlines by which things are going to be completed. So again, implementation is important. Who does what? Assigning responsibility to the parties, and then always, you know, making sure that you are on schedule. Then step 6 has to do with budget and funding. So each one of these goals that you set out with the various objectives and strategies are going to cost a certain amount of money. Some of them may be indirect cost, let's say. So you've already have a full-time employee and that's part of their job, so it's sort of kind of an indirect cost. Other costs would be, okay, let's say I want to contract trim 1,000 trees and it costs me $100 a tree, then I'm looking at $100,000 budget to trim those trees. So we always want to tie a budget to the strategy so that when this gets to the elected officials for approval, they see what the program is going to cost. And then we also look at trying to come up with suggestions to for funding for the monies. So you see here we're talking about, you know, what's it cost for the planting program or the trimming program or removal program. young tree maintenance or heritage programs. So those may be various programs that all need funding. If funds are inadequate for the new plan, then the plan should include a goal of developing suitable sources of funding. Ongoing activities such as tree care, maintenance, and tree inventory are going to need a stable source of funding. I mentioned that San Francisco plan. There's actually part of that San Francisco plan, and they've done a phenomenal job of identifying potential funding sources for the urban forest. So if you need to guide a community to exploring various options, I think they did a great job with that, and I think they did that in 2013, so that's worth looking at. So, of course, when you're developing budgets, you need to look at personnel, materials and supplies, equipment, contract services, everything that goes into it. This takes a lot of time to actually put this component of the plan together. And here's some possible funding options. Again, that San Francisco plan explores a lot of these. So gas tax is one way we fund tree work. Citywide assessment districts, grants, using volunteer groups like Relief. Some communities get monies from fines. General fund is the biggest source of funding, and it's always good to explore other departments or agencies. So, for example, if you've got a refuse department that needs a certain amount of clearance over the streets to get their trucks down to pick up trash, they could be a source of funding. All right. Step 7 is really compiling all of the supporting documents and putting it all into one nice package that you're going to take to the elected officials and get it approved. So you don't need to spend much time on that. Then step 8 then is getting it adopted. So you want the plans to be adopted first by, if there's any boards or commissions in the community, and then eventually by City Council. Because once it's approved, it's a lot easier to keep consistent funding and to keep the program. To kind of give you a little example, I worked for the city of Riverside as their urban forester, and we went through some tough times with budgets, and I came up with a trimming program based on the monies that City Council had allocated for tree trimming. And the program was a 13-year trim program, which 13 years is way too far out. A lot of trees need trimming before that. But I set this whole program out, and I divided the city into different districts to be trimmed. And doing the politically correct thing, we had 7 council members, so I had to trim in each council district some little district or some little area within that each year. But I came up with this whole calendar as to when each area of the city was going to be trimmed, and it went out 13 years. So if I got a phone call from someone who wanted their tree trimmed, and okay, let's say we're in 2014 into 15, and let's say I would say to them, well, your tree's not going to be trimmed until 2025. Well, let's do 2020, more reasonable. And they'd scream and yell saying, well, it needs to be trimmed. And I go, well, based on the program and the budget, I can't get to it until the year 2020. Well, they would go and scream at their council member and say, it's got to be trimmed sooner. And the council members would have this information in front of them, and it would support them being able to say to the resident, hey, based on the monies we have, it's not going to get trimmed until 2020. It's a tough thing for councils to bite and for staff to bite, but if you really push the issue saying, hey, you approved this trimming schedule with the monies that were budgeted, you need to support it. What ended up happening, which was interesting, is the next time around that we had council elections, 4 of the 7 council members were up for re-election. They got re-elected. The first thing they did when they came back in and were sworn in is they said, you know, the biggest issue out there was tree trimming, and we're going to double David's tree trimming budget, which was fabulous. So now I'm down to a 7-year trim cycle. And then it was interesting, 2 years later, when the other 3 were up for re-election and they got re-elected, they came back in and said the same thing, and they gave me more money, and I was down to a 5-year trimming schedule, which was great. That's the importance of a, you know, kind of shows and demonstrates the importance of a plan, the importance of getting that buy-in and approval by your elected officials. So I can't stress how important it is for that to happen. And then, of course, step 9, our last one, is really, are you getting what you want? It's developing those review mechanisms, setting up some kind of a monitoring program. I also used the example, you know, what I was just talking about in Riverside. If the city council gave me X amount of money to trim, well, let's say 5,000 trees that particular fiscal year, I would go to them mid-year in January and I would say, you gave me monies to trim 5,000 trees. At this point in time, I've trimmed, let's say, 2,000 trees or 1,500 trees, because we don't start our trimming really until the fall. But then at the end of the year, in June, when we're looking at getting my budget approved for the following year, I would go back to them and again in my presentation to them say, last year you gave me X amount of money to trim 5,000 trees. Here's the 5,000 trees that I trimmed. That helps ensure to me that I'm going to get the funding I need the following years, but it's also demonstrating to the public, it's demonstrating to the community that, hey, we're not misusing monies. This is what was budgeted, this is what we said we'd do with the money, and this is what we did with it. So this monitoring and reviewing is really important. And it also goes to saying, you know, every 5 years you should go back and look at this urban forest management plan and say, is it on track? Is it still addressing the needs of the community and the city? If not, start changing or revising it. So those are the 9 steps. What do I have here? Oh, I already went through this one about reporting regularly to elected officials. You also need to report to your co-workers and management so that everybody knows that you're staying focused on goals and objectives. So quick review. Step 1 was why you need the plan. 2, what do you have? 3, what are the community's needs? Then you start developing actions for the plan, those goals and objectives. Implementation, how's it going to get done? And come on, wake up. You can do it. There it is. Budget funding, compiling the documents, adoption, and then that monitoring program. So I just want to repeat how important this is to really, whatever community is working with, it's so important to say, you know, why is a plan needed? It's needed to ensure adequate and consistent funding. It's needed to educate the community and elected officials about the value, the importance of trees, and why we need to manage them effectively. And then, of course, the last thing is to demonstrate the effective use of public monies. So now the toolkit. I'm going to go through a little bit of just the components of the toolkit, and then Nancy will actually go online to the toolkit and show you how that functions. So pretty much the toolkit you will see, and I'll show it to you, I guess, in a minute, that there's sort of an outline of the components of it. And so you've got a title page, you're going to have an executive summary, you'll have table of contents, then you want to put down your vision and mission statements, and then you get into that introduction that I said was so important, you know, convincing why you need a plan. The background as to how this plan came about. What was it that spurred the need for the plan? Any environmental concerns, i.e. this whole global warming thing, climate action, and then you also want to lay out the benefits that trees provide, and then the scope of the plan. The next area is you talk about the status of the urban forest, that historical content. So, for example, in Riverside, the first board/commission that was ever established in the city of Riverside actually was the tree board or tree commission, because early on, 100+ years ago, they started planting trees along streets because the early founders realized the importance or the need for it. So that's kind of a historical content or historical focus in that community that they continually rely on. Whenever they talk about trees in Riverside, they talk about, hey, our founding fathers saw the need and planted trees, and we need to continue to support that. That environmental context is, at this point, you're looking at, how much rainfall do you get? What are the temperature likes, the extremes? What are the soils like? What kind of trees will grow in this environment? Tree resource assessment, again, are you going to be looking at which areas you're going to be looking at? Management, we talked about this, responsibilities ordinance, so it goes through all of that. And then it looks at community values. And then the next component of the toolkit is that strategic plan, outlining the issues and needs, establishing the goals, monitoring, and then we put into it an appendix that has technical guides. We talk about how we did things, assessment tools, any planning documents, ordinances, those sorts of things, and then at the end is the implementation plan. So, what do I have here? Hello, wake up. There it is. So this is what the first page of the plan looks like that Nancy, or the toolkit that Nancy's going to be talking about. This was the outline that I just went through, that you'll see when you click on that, it takes you to that outline. But this is what the first page looks like. And this is the logon for it.
So you should be
And what else do I have in here? So just briefly, the toolkit provides an overall conceptual framework. It provides a process. It has the elements of the plan. It's got examples in there. There's different tools to help you out. For example, and Nancy will demonstrate this to you, but if you'll go in there, they'll actually have a section on planning questions that helps guide you, and they're going to give examples. So the green is sort of defining whatever that particular area is. Then you've got examples again and planning questions. I don't want to spend much time on this because Nancy will do it. But then it allows you to develop your work plan and type in your outline and what you're going to be doing. What do I got next? It also allows you to sign on and have various users, and you can give the users different powers to edit or not edit type of thing. And oh, this was the outline page. Here's the outline. So what it's showing you in the outline is it can show you the things that have been completed, the things that you're working on. Again, I don't want to take too much of Nancy's time. But this is those components that I just went over for you. It also allows you to go in and select areas that you want to cover in the plan. So this shows an X for street trees. So this particular community doesn't want to look at street trees, they want to look at all these other things. but it allows you to say the plan's going to cover these particular areas, and you put an X and say it's not going to cover the other ones, and then they kind of get deleted. So you'll also see this in there, and this is a repeater kind of reinforcing. You want to know what you have, what it is that you want, how are you going to get there, are you getting what you want, and that takes you back to the whole circle. And these are the different components that we talked about. What you have, your tree management, community resources, identifying the needs, your findings, you synthesize that into what it is that you want. Come up with your vision, setting goals, objectives, selecting actions, developing the plan, monitoring, analyze, and revise. So this is all there for the communities that you're working with to be able to kind of see. And this is what that actually looks like in the toolkit. And then there's also at the back a resource section that you can actually click on. It'll take you and show you some resources to help support or give you direction on some things. Okay, wake up. Oh, okay. Up at the top, it highlighted Urban Forest Management Resource Tools. So you can click on any one of those, and it actually takes you to a section that talks about the benefits of trees, for example. This is highlighting inventories, and you can see sample inventories there. So again, your vision assessment, the plan's going to go into all these different areas. Going to synthesize all of that, your issues, trends, formulating goals. I think I'm repeating things. That's what I get because I don't have, usually I can see what's coming next and I'm not seeing what's coming next. But I just wanted to kind of go over things again just to reinforce a lot of this. Goals, trends, objectives, takes you to the plan. All right, where am I at? I think that's about it for me. Do you want to, how do we want to take over?
Yeah, maybe this is a good time to see if there's any questions before we...
Sure, yeah. And then you're going to go to... So you're going to turn this over, if there's no questions, then to Nancy to run the...
Exactly. And right now we don't have any questions listed, so I'm actually going to go ahead and give Nancy control of this. And Nancy, remember, you'll just need to share your screen once you have it. And then you should also be able to see the questions at that point of time. Nancy, have you been able to share your screen? There we go.
Yeah, so I think you should see, this is the live. So I'm logged in right now, and we can sort of step through this again. It's really going to be a little bit repetitious from what Dave just went through. I did want to say, I guess initially when Dave mentioned this, it was back in 2008 when this toolkit was developed. And in 2011, we started actually implementing the toolkit, and we've produced probably upwards of 25 management plans using the toolkit. In that process, we've, kind of learned where there's some bugs in the system and tried to get those fixed, and then also looked at it overall to sort of streamline it and make it a little more user-friendly. The toolkit was compiled because there was a lot of people who were involved in urban forest management who really didn't have the background and training. So there's a lot of text in this and a lot of background information in the toolkit to help people basically bring them up to speed. So to get started, there's, like I said, there's a lot of text, and it's available for you to read. And I would, if you don't have a lot of urban forestry experience, I would highly recommend that you go through this, and which is a lot of more in-depth information than what Dave just gave you. So that's the getting process and that getting started process, and then how to use the website. Let's see if that will. There we go. So this kind of gives you an idea of how the website is set up. You will see when you click onto each section, you will see an example. So there's a example of, say, maybe some California cities plan of that section, whether it be environmental or historical context. You'll see an example. And then there's planning questions, and there's a tab for planning questions. And this, I think, I always promote this because I think it's really great in that it helps stimulate thought. It may serve to get you to look at some issues that you hadn't thought about in the past. And then after you go through the planning questions, then you can start your work plan. And this is what Dave described. It can be a collaborative process. As we said, it can be anywhere from 2 to 3 year process. So it's kind of a process that you're going to repeat. You may start out in looking at your inventory, and then when you go back to look at how the management of how the forest, every forest is managed, you're going to go through the same process again. So that's why you saw that chart that Dave showed you with a lot of different arrows, because it's you're repeating the who, what, where, why, and how. You're continually asking those questions about each one of the segments that you're going to be addressing in the plan. This discusses the why aspect of it. Here's your work plan. You can add information there and then save it. Then you can go to your outline and add some more text here. And then this is just going to step you through each one of the sections that are in the outline. The outline is over here under this tab. You can go in and you can decide whether or not you want to include a section or not. We found that in the introduction, they cover historical content and environmental context. But then also when you come to discuss the status of the urban forest in item 6, it seems to be repetitious because you're talking about historical context and environmental context again.
So what they really mean, I think, in the first introductory historical context is really the background for the plan. How did it come about?
That's correct. And a lot of times what we've found with people who we've worked with, they'll just eliminate one of those sections and cover all of the historical context in one area. It's up to you. It's really kind of a whatever sort of fits your needs. Then again, under what are you talking about? What's the scope of your plan? Are you just going to be talking about street trees, or are you going to include the facility trees or parking lot trees, or are you just talking about park trees? it could be that sometimes the municipality or the organization, whether it's a foundation that has a large urban forest that they're dealing with, they may only have an inventory of a section. And in that case, they may end up just doing a pilot project. So they're going to do a management plan for, say, just their parking lot trees. And then eventually they'll come back and expand their inventory and then do the management plan for the entire headquarters or whatever it is, the parcel of land that they have to manage. So getting back to this is again the chart and the process again of planning, asking those questions again. What do you have? What do you want? Are you getting what you want? And how do you get what you want? And then repeating that for each one of these steps. That what is your tree resource? How is your management of the resource happening? What are your community values? A lot of times this process will take much longer than others because you need to find out from your community. In some cases, we've worked with organizations that have opted to send out surveys. In other instances, we've worked with organizations that have opted to have community planning meetings where they invite the interested parties in the community where they know that there's activists or whatever, and they'll come in and give their input. So however it is that community or the stakeholders in that community decide to determine what their community values are, it's going to determine how long that process is going to take. And then your vision statement and your mission statement, which is very important to establish in the beginning because you're always going to go back to that when you're looking at setting up your strategic plan with your goals and objectives. You're going to go back to that and say, are these goals accomplishing what we envision our city or our organization to be in the next 20 to 25 years. So one of the things that the toolkit has is,
go ahead.
When you go into doing the assessments and then going back to what do you want and developing your mission and vision, you can go into data synthesis, which is after you've gathered all this information, you look at what trends do you see happening within the organization, and what are the issues that you see happening, and then establishing your goals. And here's the tab that I was talking about. Here's your examples tab, and then here's your planning questions, which, what issues and trends have been identified relative to the tree resource. And then the good thing about this is there are goals that they sort of prompt you with. So if you're really at a loss to come up with any goals, you can use the goals, you can edit them over here with this tool, or you can say, I don't want to include this goal, it really doesn't have any pertinence to what we're doing. So it is it's very useful if you're new to this process and you really don't know where to begin. This sort of helps you, it starts out with a framework. And that's true for the goals, and then as you move on to objectives and then developing your actions, you will see these same examples and planning questions throughout. When you're finished with the entire process, like I said, there are collaborative tools here, so there's a way of scheduling when you're in the planning process. Let's see if I can get to that. Let's see. You can assign and you can sort of develop a timeline and then assign certain tasks to different people. And then when they come back into the plan and sign off as it was being completed, you can see what the target date is, who this information is, who's going to collect this information, when do you expect it to be completed, and then when is your actual completed date. And then you can, if someone wants to go in and edit, they can go ahead and do that as well. So it is a collaborative tool in that respect. I'm sort of at a stopping point here.
Well, go back to the front page.
Okay.
Kind of need to walk them through, I think, how this thing. All right, you want to show them how to log on?
Okay, so yeah, I forgot about that because I already did log in. I think I did anyway. Why does it say log in? So let's try that. So you can go up into the corner here. If you haven't registered, it'll give you a little, you just say sign in, or I think it's a box for signing in. And then you just fill out a little bit of information. It's just your name and whatever organization you're representing. And then there's a little registration number that they ask you to fill in, and then your password, and then you're logged in, and then that stays there for the duration of the project.
I show them what settings is about.
So the settings tab you edit your username. I just created this today. Who is your team manager? You can add users here. This is the profile of whatever that person is, and then you can add particular comments in there. And then we have a tab here for resources. This is one of the things that we're going to focus on when we start updating the toolkit because we found that a lot of that information is now, even though it's 6 years old, it's become outdated. So we have a lot of new data that we're going to be adding, and as I mentioned, we're going to try and streamline this so it's a little bit more user-friendly. So if somebody wants to start out and start writing their plan, they're going to be able to do that. If they want to take some time to research, there's going to be whole sections for text, and rather than having it a lot of text as you go through the process.
Do you want to show them this section here and how it functions? Because you've been using it, but you haven't really talked about.
Okay, so here are the management tools, and so if you click on economic benefits, that's going to talk about, and that's going to sort of give you some assistance as to why trees are good.
I guess what I'm referring to is the section on the left that Nancy's working on is a way of getting quickly to different parts of the whole management plan. So where she's saying if you're looking at urban forest management tools and you click on it, then let's say you're now working on the soils and roots, you just go down and click on that and it takes you to the soils and roots section. And so each one of these different ones that pop up will help you get to different parts of the plan that you can look at or see what you're working on.
And I'm in the resource section now, so these are, when you click on Guides to Urban Forest Management Planning, this is just a whole list, a raft of resources that have been published online that you can refer to for more information.
I'm going to click on Management Planning, show them that.
And then the same thing over here, they start you out with the questions, what do you have, and then assess the history. You scroll down, you can look at your examples, look at your planning questions, and then move on to your work plan where we just discussed about assigning people, assigning a target date when it was actually completed. And then you're adding text here. As you add text, you can go back and you'll be able to go to your outline eventually, and you can click on whether or not these sections have been completed, and there's save buttons all along when you're adding text, and then excuse me, you can go over here and it'll say have you finished your plan, and you can check that there. You can also look at it beforehand and download it as a work plan or download it as an outline, and those buttons are right over here.
So this, the area where you put the information in is, will be a Word document. So if you're working separately on a Word document, you can cut and paste and add it in, or you can add it here and cut and paste and take it out. Yeah, click on that.
The when you are adding things, it is you have all of the tools, the Word tools. So if you start adding content there, you'll see all of your Microsoft Word tools. So you can copy and paste and change your fonts.
Go back up to that.
Where did you?
I want the corner piece over.
Oh.
So as you can see, when you click on this, the management planning thing, and you've got what do you have, what do you want, all of these different ones. You notice when you click on one, then you have the drop downs. So as Nancy was saying, you're not going to be working on everything in sequential order. You're going to be jumping around depending on what's happening in the process. And so again, this is a way of quickly finding where you're at. So if you're working on goals, you can come down here and click on goals, and it takes you to the goals section you're working on. If you are going back to here saying, gee, I need to work on, where am I at? I want to work on some actions for that particular goal that I've been on, then you click to the actions. And then if you want to go back to a different goal and work on that, so it allows you that flexibility of jumping around. The other way is just to go to the outline and scroll down. And you can click on any one of those in the outline, and it's going to take you back to where you're working. So there's a whole variety of ways of jumping around to work on the sections that you're working on.
And for instance, so I just clicked on the environmental context. So it's going to prompt you here if you want to discuss rainfall. If that's an issue in your area, you can check that or uncheck it. Say you want to exclude that. You don't want to discuss that in your plan. So these are prompts, and then you can add others. If there's another issue, maybe you have a particular invasive pest that you want to talk about, you can add that as a environmental factor.
You want to show them how the goals and objectives work?
So,
or I should say objectives and actions.
So once we've set the goals, so these are all X'd out, so I need to check them. So we'll check a couple of these so that they'll appear when we move on. So I'm going to save that. And then we go to set objectives. And here's the first goal: establish and maintain optimal levels of tree cover to maximize ecosystem benefits provided by the urban forest. So that's our first goal. So now we want to add objectives to that. So here would be objective 1.1, because this is our goal 1. We want to include that, and so we may say that we want to develop we want to have an urban tree canopy assessment. So you would type that in there, and then
type that.
and then save it.
Now, as you notice that Nancy, this keeps taking her back to the beginning of stuff. That's one of the pains in the butt about this program that we're going to change, so that it should take you back to where you've been working rather than taking you back to the top and you got to scroll all the way down again.
So that's an objective, and then a similar process for developing the actions underneath the objectives, and then you would go, how do you get what you want? And that's select actions and tools. And so here's our first goal, establish and maintain optimal levels. This is, we want to develop an urban tree canopy. So what would be one action for developing an urban tree canopy assessment? That might be
Hiring a firm to do
yeah,
LiDAR or something.
Right, or gathering aerial imagery.
Put in there who's going to do it and by when.
And then we'll just say by who will do that, and then by when. But those are the questions that you would answer in this action plan. So you need to be able to say who's going to be, not a specific person like Nancy Sappington, but perhaps partner with X organization, or someone within the organization like the urban forester for that organization is going to gather the aerial imagery. And when is that person going to do that? Say by 2016, the end of the fiscal year. So those, and then you would just go ahead and hit save, which, as Dave pointed out, takes you back to the very beginning, and then you have to scroll down to where you were. But you'll see that you have added your action.
And then you can add another action under it until the whole objective has been completed.
So once you do that and fill out all this, it's, like I said, it's a step-by-step process, but it does prompt you. It does take a while, but if you fill out all the information like it's prompting you for, and you come back to your outline, you can go ahead and download it or actually print it and see what it looks like. And so this, of course, is just not filled out entirely at all, but that gives you an idea of basically what it's going to look like. So do we have any questions at all? I know this is a lot of information, and we're breezing right through it, and possibly once you start implementing this, you're going to have questions.
I guess you'd want to identify what those different things mean or not.
So yeah, you probably have seen this, and I probably glossed over it. So the green check mark means that that's going to be left. It's a section that will be left in the plan. If you decide that you don't want to include a specific section, you can just exit out. And we showed you that when we were in the goals section, where there were several goals that we included and several that we kept X'd out. Is there any questions? I'm sure like I said, there's a lot of information here. The address is ufmptoolkit.com.
So do you want to give this back to Kristen to manage the questions? Do you want to take this back, Kristen?
Sure, or I'll let you continue to keep that screen in case any questions come up where they're going to ask something specific about how you get around the toolkit or anything along those lines. Right now, it doesn't look like we have any immediate questions, but just as you said, my guess is as the members start to actually use this tool, they'll come up with lots of questions. Is there a contact information for you that they might be able to use if questions do come up at a later date?
Sure. You can email me, and it's my initials, which is NRH, and then my last name, Sappington, SAPPINGTON, at me, M as in Mary, Edith.com.
Okay, hopefully you guys all wrote that down. If not, I'm sure I have it as well, so I'm happy to share that with you if questions do come up later. And
Yeah, mine is droger65@gmail.
Perfect.
One of the things that we found as we were using the toolkit is that, and I think I mentioned this earlier, is there's a lot of text and it tends to be a little intimidating. But once you actually get in and start exploring, you find out that you really can't make a lot of mistakes, and sometimes it just helps to dive in.
Oh, you want to show them that save feature? Because that's a...
Well, we did show the save.
Okay, just
Yeah.
point out that you need to
Yeah.
save it, because if you don't, it's gone.
Right. At the end of each section, whenever you fill something out, like for instance right here in this box, it says save. So if you're going to add some content here, whatever that may be, trees are good, you want to make sure that you hit save, and you know that you did that because it's going to take you to the top of the page. So
if it doesn't take you to the top, then it didn't get saved right.
yeah.
Definitely good to know. And it is something they can easily register for, correct, on that page when you're not logged in, just up at the
That's
top
right.
it says register or log in. Okay.
Yeah, just create a username and password.
And now one thing that I'm curious about is how many of the participants think that they will be implementing the toolkit.
Yeah, I don't know. Participants who are on right now, if you want to raise your hand if you think that you would use it, just knowing the projects that we will be working on, my guess is that it might be used up with our Sacramento team. There is an urban forestry project there, as well as down in our Central Valley, and they're mainly based out of Fresno, and that's clearly the project, that's the CAL FIRE project. So my guess would be that they would be possibly using different parts of this toolkit as well.
Great, great. It's a wonderful resource for just learning how to manage the urban forest.
Definitely. It has been wonderful, and I appreciate both of your times today taking us through this. And I know I learned a lot. Nothing
Great.
else, so excellent.
That's good. Trees are important to our health and our future environment.
Definitely, definitely. Well, it doesn't look like we do have any questions at this point in time. I will make sure that they do have your contact information if any questions come up a little bit later or as they start to utilize the toolkit. And members, if you have any questions that didn't get answered today, also don't hesitate to send them my way, and I'm able to sort of help connect as well. But thank you again, Nancy and David, so much for taking time to speak with us today.
Sure.
You're welcome.
Wonderful. Have a lovely day, and we'll go ahead and end the webinar now.